Hello and welcome to episode 186 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark, I'm the green tank, and with me as always are Kellen the red tank and Neelan the orange tank.
Hello.
Hello.
If you're listening to the show, you've probably played a handful of games, if not way more, and you may think to yourself, you know what, I've played a bunch of games, I don't like co-op games, or I don't like area control games, or maybe my group doesn't like hidden trader games. And while that may be true, we think that there are perhaps a couple games that maybe you should try, even if you don't like the overarching mechanism. And so we're going to be talking about games that might break the mold in terms of mechanisms out there. And maybe if you don't like a certain mechanism, you'll give the one that we suggest to try, or maybe suggest some of your own on our Discord. But before we get into games that might change your mind, let's talk about the games that we've played. Neelan's going to start with his play of Pocket Galapagos. I'll follow that up with Cascadia. And finally, Kellen will talk to us about Bites.
I was hoping you'd butcher the pronunciation of Galapagos. But then you said it perfectly, so I couldn't make fun of you.
There'll be plenty more chances
through
the episode to do that.
Good.
Neelan, take us to Galapagos.
Pocket Galapagos is a small game by he what makes small games, Mr. John Cloudus of Small Box
The
Games.
Willy Wonka of small boxes.
Exactly. If you want a game and you want it in a small box, John Cloudus is the guy you get. Pocket Galapagos is a solo game. At the time of its creation, it was the first purely solo game that Cloudus had put out, and it comes in a delightful little tiny box, which is a form factor that I love for solo games, like something that was always so appealing to me about, say, the Button Shy line of products is these games you can just carry everywhere and break out and play on like a small surface. And Pocket Galapagos absolutely fits that need. The game, broadly speaking, thematically, and I'm going to do this because this is actually going to help to understand part of the feel of the game, is that you're sort of balancing the populations of species on the Galapagos Islands. So, broadly speaking, there are three main species whose populations you're managing. There are rats, there are finches, and there are ants. And by playing a card, you are both affecting its population and playing some sort of ability. Now, the cards that you play are other species of marine animals, like turtles, herons, and so on. And the way that the game sort of breaks down is on your turn, you're going to deal 5 cards to the middle, 5 of these marine animals. Pick 2 of them to play to your ocean. Now, when you play them to your ocean, you're going to be bumping the populations of those 3 other species I was talking about, those 3 smaller species, and getting some sort of ability. But only if you don't already have that species in your ocean. If you do already have that species, all you're doing is clearing both from the ocean and discarding both. So it's kind of like the first time you play an animal, you get its ability. The second time you clear it. The next time you play it, you get its ability. The fourth time you clear it. But all of these abilities also manipulate the other cards in some ways, so there might be ways to move those cards out of your ocean or move them to these 3 other, let's call them zones. There are 3 other sections where cards can get played, but this time they're played face down. And that happens with the remainder of the cards of the 5 you draw. So as a reminder, you're drawing 5 cards, you're choosing 2 to play to your ocean, then you're going to choose 2 to flip face down and play to one of these zones. In one of the zones, if you're able to play it there, and there are some limitations on how you can play them there, then your population will increase. The other one is sort of just like this freebie zone where nothing will happen. But if you can't play to either of those 2 zones, they go into your invasive species zone, and this is where the bad starts to happen. Because as animals start to collect in your invasive species zone, they're going to start hitting their population more drastically. Because what happens is at the end of every round, each of those 3 species, the rats, the birds, the ants, their population moves down 1 plus 1 for however many of them are in the invasive species. And if any of those 2 populations ever hit 0 simultaneously, you've lost. So you're manipulating these populations up and down, trying to sort of keep them on the edge of 2 of them not becoming extinct. And worse than that, if you ever get 3 cards of one of those types into the invasive species zones, the game also ends. So there's this balance of like, you can't just keep putting cards into those zones. You sort of have to be manipulating them in and out. And that's where all these cards abilities comes into place. Because this would not be a Cloudus game if it did not have these cool card combos where you're playing a card to your ocean and then that allows you to move a card from one of the zones back to the middle or remove all of the cards from the middle out of the game in some way. So there's this card comboing that is the basis of the manipulation of your tableau. It's really neat. And one of the things I like the most about it is the game sort of teaches you how to play it for the first time as you're playing it. There's no rule book. The rules are just on the first sets of cards. So it's almost got the tiniest hint of that sort of Frieza fast forward feel to it, where your first game is kind of a guided playthrough. And then you're like, oh, I get this now. And you sort of shuffle it up and like play out through the whole thing again. One of the things I loved about that is that the first game had this sense of discovery, of not really knowing what I was getting into. Every time a new animal species would come up, I'd be like, oh, that ability seems cool. I want to try do that in some fun combo-y way. But I wouldn't quite get the handle on that until like subsequent games I played, because this really only comes together when you're combining those cards in interesting ways. I thought this was really neat. I think that it does the thing that it sort of wants to thematically quite well, which is feeling like you're just on the knife's edge all the time of like one of these species going extinct. And there's a minor press your luck aspect about where you're putting these cards into, so that if a third one comes out, you're bust, or if you end up pulling another card, then your population sinks. So it just has enough tension riding all the time throughout it while still escalating, because the only thing you have to do to win is last 10 rounds, but the game is by its nature just getting harder and harder and harder as it goes, because all of those zones are just getting more and more overpopulated.
I see a card that says called Dominant Species.
Yes.
So is this a metaverse situation?
Yeah, this is in the Dominant Species universe.
You can combine the two games, I assume?
Yeah, I hope so. It reminds me a little bit of Evolution to some extent. That card combo manipulation is kind of the fun of the game, but packaged into like a solo thing. The timing of knowing and to play a card into your ocean to like say, okay, I'm not going to get the ability this time, but I'm going to free it up so I can get the ability next time, and knowing when to just fire on an ability in order to get its maximum benefit is great. I thought this was really neat. I feel like I have a few more plays to like get the most out of it that I want to, but I do feel like there's a little bit of a ceiling on it for me. Like, I feel like having now played 3 or 4 games of this, I don't see myself playing more than maybe another 3 or 4, because I'm already getting to the point where I feel like I have a handle on it. And then the only sort of overriding factor on that is a little bit of luck in terms of when you turn a card face down and what that species is going to be and whether that's going to bust you or keep you going. So it's such a neat little experiment. And I think for one that is as small and compact as it is, I would definitely recommend it. I don't know, Kellen, you might have to help me here. Like, in terms of like the business model for his stuff, like how does that work exactly? So
you probably can't get a physical copy produced by Small Box Games anymore unless they reprint it with some expansion. But the print and play is $2.50 on their website. So I think if we divide your 4 plays plus another, you said 3 or 4 plays, 8 plays divided by 250. I don't know. Someone in Mensa do that math for me.
That would be the way to go. Like, if you can get the print and play for this, I would highly recommend it. I had a great afternoon playing it, like I said, 3 or 4 times, and I'm literally looking forward to playing it again.
I really love the theme and the way the artwork is done.
Yeah.
I generally don't have very much interest in solo games, although that's sort of changing, but in general I don't. But the theme of this and the artwork make it quite appealing to me.
Looks like it's also on TTS, according to their website. So that's cool. Yeah, I think the art, there's a sea lion that is calling my name in the illustration. So that's cool.
That is Pocket Galapagos by Small Box Games.
Thanks to our friend Amoria, I got a chance to play Cascadia. This is a game by Randy Flynn with art by Beth Sobel. Cascadia is a really simple game to teach and to explain and to play. Every round, there's going to be an array of 4 tiles in front of you and 4 chips representing one of 5 different animals. So there's a salmon, hawk, bear, fox, and elk. And every round, you are going to select one of the pairings. So every round, you're going to pick up a tile and a animal. And you're going to place the tile on your tableau, and you're going to place the animal onto any tile that will accept the animal, because all tiles, in addition to representing one of 5 different biomes, it also will tell you which animals can live on that tile. So I might draw a tile that has an elk on it, and along with that tile, I get a salmon, and I can't place the salmon on that tile, but maybe earlier on I had a tile that allows me to place a salmon, and I place a salmon on that tile. And before every game, 5 cards, one for every animal, are drawn. And that tells you basically how the animal scores. So it might be the case that bears score for mating pairs. So they want to be paired off, but not around any other bears. And foxes might score for having different types of animals around the foxes. And elk might score for the longest chain of elks. So each animal will have a different scoring. And I think in the box there are 5 scorings per animal that you can randomly draw, something like that, maybe 4. So each time, although the structure is obviously the same in the way you're drawing tiles and placing them on your board, the scoring can be quite variable, and that makes for a much different feeling type of game each time. But that's basically all there is to it. Draw a pair of tile and animal, place them on your tableau in an effort to score. Once you run out of tiles, then the game ends and you score. You score for the ways that the animals score, the scoring I mentioned earlier based on these cards, and for longest collection of one type of terrain. So for your biggest forest, you'll score 1 point for every tile in that. And there's a bonus if you have the largest forest of any of your competitors. But it's very, very simple to teach, very simple to play, really sort of relaxing. It is multiplayer solitaire. There is a little bit of a potentially taking tiles that you know your competitors want, because if you can tell that they could really use that next salmon and salmons are sort of running out, you can tell there's not many more salmons in the box, you might want to take something to block them off. But for the most part, you're really looking at your own tableau and you're trying to build it out in a way to maximize your points. And it's just really, really fun and simple. It sort of feels like a really nice, like abstract family game that you might, again, take to your parents' house and teach them and play over coffee, something like that. The art, again, by Beth Sobel is really colorful, really nice. And it's just a pleasant game all in all. I think I've played a lot of games that I might call pleasant in a sort of derogatory term recently, just like sort of average games. But this feels different than that. This feels pleasant in a way that I would actually be eager to play again, for the simplicity of it, but also the scoring. The way that the scoring changes game to game is fun. It makes each game sort of interesting and different.
It feels like Calico to me, and I haven't played either of them, so I'm just saying words.
Right. No, I think that's a natural comparison because of the tiles and stuff like that. It didn't really feel like Calico to me, especially in the way that Calico feels like you're sort of strangling as you go on and you're running out of space and you feel like I can't do anything. This is a way, way freer experience. You always feel like there's something you can do in this game. So yeah, I definitely see the comparison to Calico, but this is a much different game. And that's not to say that there's any sort of overlap in, like, if you like this, you won't like that. I don't think there's anything in that comparison.
This is blowing up Instagram, board game Instagram right now because of how pretty it is and how simple, I don't know, and kind of iconic some of the stuff is and colorful.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is Cascadia by Randy Flynn and Beth Sobel.
All right, we are going to be talking about a game that thematically should have been talked about in the last episode, and that is Bites, a game about ants. This game is from BoardGameTables.com, I think the officially worst board game publisher name that has ever existed for a board game publisher.
Or best, because you know what their website is without even have to look it up.
That's true. They got us. Bites is a remake of an older abstract game that has been given a theme. This is a featherweight game with ant meeples in it. The board is made up in the same way that you make a deep sea adventure board, where you take the tiles and you sort of build the board in any direction you want and put the anthill at one end and use all the different pieces to build a board. So there are 5 colors of ants. And there are, oddly enough, 5 different types of spaces. No, there are actually 7. I'm wrong. Spaces that you can land on. And on your turn, you choose one of the ants and you pick it up. And all you do, no choice, right? Neelan, what do? We pick up the red ant. Where do you think the red ant goes?
The red space.
The apple, you idiot.
Sorry.
The red apple. So you don't have a player pawn. You pick up the ant. You move him to that space. And then, Neelan, you get to choose to collect the resource on the left or the right of that. So you could pick up the cheese. You could pick up the chocolate. You could pick up the wine. You could pick up the grapes. You could pick up the bread. You could pick up the pepper.
Which one are you going to pick up, Neelan?
I would pick up the apple, obviously.
You can't pick up the apple. That's when you landed on. Right?
You can't pick up the... Neelan.
You idiot.
You idiot.
Wait, are there apples never next to other apples?
Well, there could be.
So I could pick up the apples while you're saying.
Potentially. So this has the function, right, of reducing the length of the board, right? As you go, the board is sort of slowly disappearing. So 5 ants, but there are 7 things that you can pick up. What does that mean? Well, wine is another one of these things that ants drink, so for whatever reason. The best system about Bites, the best thing that is in this game, is that there are 4 decks of cards, and each game you will choose a card from each deck, and that will randomly change up the game, which is cool.
Sounds like it's very much like Cascadia in that way, the variable scoring conditions.
One of the decks is the wine deck, which will tell you how wine scores. So it may go exponentially. It may go, if you have too many, you don't score points, etc., etc. There is a chocolate deck. The chocolate deck tells you what special power the chocolate has. So when you collect it, you can then use it for a special power. Again, which is cool. There's a third deck that is just a modifier that puts like a blanket change to the entire game. And then the last one, which is the last mechanism that we need to talk about, tells you when the ants get to the anthill, how you place them. So it may be first ant to the end gets to go to the top, or it may be completely the other way. The first ant that gets there goes to the bottom. And then at the end of the game, your point total is where the red ant is placed in the hill. That is what apples are worth. So apples may be worth 4 points, or they may be worth 1 point. Wildly variable. And so it's surprisingly cutthroat and competitive for what is literally an LOL, pick up the pieces and start playing game. It is very good.
Yeah, it sounds it.
I enjoyed it a lot. I think we would love to play it together. It is bafflingly produced. I am not baffled often, but I am baffled by Bites. On Amazon right now, this game is $39, which you may say, wow, $39. You might be able to get it for cheaper from somewhere else, but each of these pieces is double layered, okay? Like really nicely double layered, right? But it's like, it's ant themed, and the double layer is like an apple that's like half bitten off, So, we were talking about sea lions and, beautiful Cascadia, and like, they're double layering like apple cores and like cheeses with bite marks out of it. Like, I'm not happy about it.
Right.
It's very hard to recommend this at the price of it. I was excited to try it. My mom really liked it, and I enjoyed, oh, wow, like look at all the different ways that this could go. We played it twice, and, that reversal of now you don't want the ants to get there, where you're sort of rushing them, and shared incentives where it's like, all right, Mom, we're in on apples together. Let's not screw this up. Let's not let them get any of the apples. Really, really good filler, start the game night type of game. The ant meeples are cool. I'm not sure about the production. I have questions.
Is it a small box at least?
No.
Oh, it's not. Well, that's worrying. Because, I would imagine, we're talking about the pay the premium for the small, highly produced, Oink realm, I can see the appeal, but, if you're still getting a big box at the end of the day for a small, small game, that sort of production mismatch is a hard thing.
It's good.
It does sound fun. It sounds really
well,
good.
and the ant tower at the end is 3D, right? So you place the little ants on up as you go, and the ant meeples are cute. I think there's a zebra ant meeple, which I have not used, so I'm sure that's some kind of special card. It's just weird and cool. And again, I also don't, the theme does nothing for me. The theme is like -2 points, so I actually like it a lot more than I'm saying here on the show. And that is Bites from BoardGameTables.com.
So on to our feature topic. I'll be honest, I'm not a person who likes co-op games generally. Kellen, what kind of games do you not enjoy?
I love all board games.
Oh, yeah,
I'm an omni gamer. Nom, nom, nom.
Neelan, what kind of games do you not like?
I don't know. Trick-taking games?
All right. So we all have games, except Kellen, that we don't like, types of games we don't like. But there's always a game that maybe breaks that rule. For example, Kellen, big anti-Marvel guy.
What,
known for his anti-Marvel stance.
I'm not anti-everything, first of all. I love most things and all
right.
people.
No, okay.
Okay.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. But he's occasionally, when he's in a dark mood,
yes,
will not go for a Marvel/superhero movies. But big fan of Unbreakable, right?
Huge fan of Unbreakable, the best superhero movie ever.
So there you go. So even though you might not like a genre as a whole, there are potentially games, in this case, that you might enjoy, even if you don't like the overarching mechanism. So that's what we're going to talk about on the show today. Does anyone want to start with an example of a genre and maybe an exception?
Yes, I would love to start, Mark. Thank you for asking. Area Control is one of my favorite genres of board games. This is typified or typified by giant miniatures on a map, duking it out, huge mounds of plastic, garish, over-the-top production, and fighty, direct confrontation. But it doesn't have to be. And there's a game that I wanted to re-highlight here that I think could work for people who traditionally don't enjoy area control. And that game is, again, another game I can't pronounce, Battle for Rokugan. Rokugan. Who knows? I don't know if it's a real place, because I know that the theme that they've made is like Legend of the Five Rings, right, Neelan?
Yeah, that's right, I think.
So this is a Fantasy Flight game from 2017 that bucks a lot of the conventions and a lot of the trends of these sort of fighty area control, dudes on a map, people on a plane style games. It comes in a small box, right? Boom, right off the bat, it's already different. It has a beautiful board that is understated, pastels. It has no miniatures. Okay, that right there is like a deal breaker for some people. They're like, I only want cardboard and cubes, baby. That's what I want. Great, you've got it here in Battle for Rokugan. Gameplay-wise, I think this does some really, really interesting things because the game is a lot about tension and bluffing and hidden deployment. So it's a lot less like, hey, Neelan, I moved my troops into your territory and I've punched you in the face. It's actually like I set down a token that's pointed at Neelan's territory and Neelan goes, hey, Kellen, what's that? And I go, it's nothing, Neelan. Don't worry about it. And you do that a few rounds, and then they all get revealed together, and there's just this big, amazing moment of reveal. I also really like that Battle for Rokugan, your choices are not wide open. You're actually drawing a hand, and some people don't like this, right? Because it does restrict what you can do, but I think narrowing those choices down does help this game. And again, one of the best things about it, it plays quickly. This is a sub 2-hour game in the genre. Many of the best area control, the best fighty games are 3 hours, slug it, back and forth affairs. This does not overstay its welcome. I feel in many ways it pushes against a lot of those tropes of the genre, and someone who has bounced pretty hard off of area control or these fighty type games may look at this game and go, I would play that game, and they may find themselves enjoying it more than the genre would have them suspect.
I think this is a really good one to start off with because I think potentially of all the mechanisms we're going to talk about, the one that I think probably gets the most like I never play X might be the area control game because of the aggressive nature. I think if I polled people who I played games with and asked them what is the one type of game you wouldn't play, I think this might be the winner. So it's good that we start off with that.
I also think that the thing that you mentioned, Kellen, that I think that it does really smartly is basically, like you said, sort of abstracting all of the combat away. So you have this feeling of territory changing hands because it does, but there's no like explicit combat phase. There's no like, let's stop, let's roll dice, let's do this. Everything sort of happens in a reveal. That's kind of like, oh God, you're coming at me with this, but I blocked with this. It all resolves instantly. So you have sort of like these setups of borders, the defining of territory, the back and flow forth of people taking control of areas and back, but without an extensive and elaborate combat phase.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in the same way that I go, ooh, when we talk about Marvel movies, you know, I do think there's that type of person when the miniatures come out, when they see the Cthulhu Wars and the Komets. And I do feel like this just as a total package just somehow feels, it manages to be that thing, but feel quite a bit different. Yeah. And so, yeah, I would be excited to bust this one out again. And looking it back up, I'm just like, wow, why haven't we played this in the last year or so?
Right. I think a common theme that we might get when covering all these exceptions might be the short time frame. Kellen mentioned this is a game that does a lot of area control in a short amount of time. And I think when you're asking people to play games that they think they don't want to play or generally don't like, one way to sell them or yourself on it is to know that is a shorter game. And that's not an exception with the game I'm bringing up. I've already mentioned that I'm not a big fan of co-op games in general, but one co-op game that I would play and that I do enjoy playing is The Crew. The Crew takes trick-taking but makes it a co-op situation, and it's a game that you can play really until you have your fill. There's a number of missions in the book that you're trying to accomplish with your team, but you could play a couple if you wanted to for a change of pace, or you could make a night of it and try to get through as many as you wanted to. I think it fixes a lot of the problems that I have with co-op games. The first being it removes the quarterbacking issue by restricting the discussion among the board. You can't talk except in a limited manner, which a lot of co-op games do, Hanabi obviously being one of them.
Such a good game. I would say if that could take up 2 spots in my top 50, I would do it in a heartbeat.
That is a nice callback. Another problem I have in general with co-op games is the feeling that you're playing against a random board setup. Like when you're playing Pandemic, you're sort of playing against the way the cards were sort of dealt in the stack. And obviously, you're not going to get around that with probably any co-op games, and you're not getting around that with the crew because you might be dealt a hand of cards that just makes it more difficult or maybe impossible, although I don't know if that's going to be the case. But the rounds are so short, and trick-taking is such a well-known theme that for whatever reason, that sort of mitigates the negative feeling I have about the randomness of the setup and the fact that you're playing against how the cards have sort of fallen, because you sort of take it for granted that if you're playing a trick-taking game, that's going to happen anyway. Even if you're playing a competitive trick-taking game, you sort of realize, okay, these are the hands I'm dealt. I just have to make do with it. So it feels like it's less of a bitter pill to swallow with the crew's trick-taking nature. Yeah, so the crew is a co-op that I would recommend.
Even at the length, right? I'm thinking about like Pandemic, right? How many games of the crew could you play during Pandemic's like rules explanation?
Sure.
And like that's not nothing. And then that shared infrastructure, right, carries over to game 15 where you've still got the same basic rules, but some kind of novel change to the system.
Right.
It did a lot with a little, which is cool.
I also think like it has one specific niche to it that, like I feel like a lot of people potentially have backgrounds, especially in a family context, of having only played a lot of sort of, standard deck card games. And this feels like something that you could introduce to that group that's just like, hey, you've played standard card games or standard trick-taking games, but here's something that's going to feel a little bit different.
Right. Exactly.
The game that I wanted to talk about is in the economic genre. So typically when I think about economic games, these tend to be games that are like heavier, longer games. My mind goes to something like a Food Chain Magnate, or perhaps the wealth of games in the 18xx genre, something maybe like a Brass. But what I like about this particular game is it does feel like it captures a lot about the genre while being more accessible. And that game is Smartphone Inc. I think there's a couple of good reasons for that. I think, it feels like a very modern board game, both in terms of production, in terms of art, in terms of theme. Like if you look at the theme for Smartphone Inc., it is literally about being cell phone manufacturers, and you're investing in different types of technology like 5G and so on in order to like capitalize the market in different sections of the world. It has from the get-go a very vibrant theme that looks and feels very modern. It also has a very sort of novel action mechanism to it, where you're sort of overlaying tiles in order to determine the sorts of actions at what strengths you're doing. But underneath all that, it has the sort of things you'd want from this type of game. You have price setting. You have trying to beat people out at certain price points in order to either beat them to market or come in at a higher, riskier price, but potentially get more for each product sold. There are elements of sort of like an area control system where you're trying to spread across the map and have control over specific territories before other players do. It just feels like it captures a lot of the sort of dynamicism of that genre while not being dry, while not being convoluted, and just having a sort of very modern, very current energy to it.
Except, Neeland, it is not 5G, which we know is a conspiracy from the government, but 4G, which is the technology of good smartphones.
I agree with you completely on this one. I've played this with a number of folks, most of which I think would never play a economic game. It's very pretty. It's very easy to teach. I like the way that the rounds are broken up. You go from one phase to the next phase and things are very clear. It's even got the novelty of the 2 pieces of cardboard that you have to manipulate to try to figure out how much phones you're producing and what sort of abilities you're going to be able to unlock. Yeah, it's just a really great economic game.
If you have not looked at Smartphone Inc., you absolutely should just look at the production of it. And in particular, you should look at the player screens, which the first time I played this game, I was like, something is amiss. Because when you look at your player screen, you realize It's literally the multiplication tables for 2 through, I think, like 8.
Yeah.
Literally, it just says 3, and it's like 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12, 3 times 5 is 15. And it just goes, literally, it covers the entirety of the inside of your player screen. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, what the hell is happening here? But it does such a good job of abstracting away what may make you look away from an economic game, with this player screen kind of being the baffling exception when they don't think that you can multiply 4 times 4 on your own. So they've done that for you, even, Neelan.
Exactly. You don't even need to know maths to play this economic game. It's all just
Perfect.
printed on the screens for you.
Complete aside, but I am always shocked by people who dislike this theme. Like, there's something so weird about being like mega conglomerate tech guru Apple versus Android. Like, I think it's so fun and dumb because of what it is, but other people are like, I couldn't possibly play this game. And it's like, well, you have like 100 games about sheep farming and like train routes, which is like fine. Again, it's all fine, but like, why is train routes cool, but like cell phone distribution is somehow, we've crossed the line, guys. We've crossed the line right here. This is my line in the sand. The second game I wanted to highlight is a genre that I personally struggle with. So as opposed to Area Control, a genre that I do not struggle with, that I win all the time in, we move on to a genre that I do not like that much, which is abstract strategy. These games are typified by being boring looking and looking like they came from a different millennium. How long is a millennium, Mark? Is that more than a century? Which one should I go with?
Millennium is longer.
Okay, many millennia. Huh? How about that?
Nice.
You know, you've got your Go's, you've got your chesses, you've got your checkers, you've got your tack, right? For all you modern fantasy readers who read bad fantasy novels. But what they don't do is have a theme that draws you in, that makes you excited to try and replay the game. And a game that successfully drew me in with its theme, with its production, with its weirdness is Tash-Kalar, Arena of Legends. Now, this one is hard for me to admit because it comes from a designer that is one of Neelan's favorites and not one of my favorites, and that's Vlaada Chvátil. In Tash-Kalar, each player is a different fantasy group, master of magic, and with asymmetric powers. You have a different deck of cards, and you are placing pieces onto a grid in what looks like Go, right? It looks like I'm putting down pieces, and it looks like it's going to be boring, and then it's like, no, man, because I put the pieces in that order, I have now summoned Ye Eldest Tree, and this does this stuff, and now your pieces are gone from the board, and my pieces have been upgraded. And you didn't see that coming. And then on the next turn, they're like, but no, this shape on the board means I have a werewolf. And it attacks your blah, blah, blah by surrounding your tree. And it's just this back and forth affair of, in some ways, it felt kind of innovation, like in the swings of tempo. Neelan and I took to playing this, I believe, on Board Game Arena quite a bit during the pandemic and having a really, really fun time. And we were playing, I believe it's a version of it where there are sort of objectives where you want to be in these locations at the end of your turn. So you're swinging back and forth and summoning creatures with art that feels akin to a collectible card game or a Magic-style game. Really just makes for a abstract strategy game that comes to life for me. You know, I know a lot of people cite Santorini here as a abstract strategy game that like has a theme, but like, come on. Like, it's like little pieces of plastic and it's only cool because you're moving them up and down. That game is boring. Like, Tash-Kalar integrates a theme and Santorini is a set dressing. All right, Neelan, disagree with me. I know you're ready.
I kind of want to, because I do think that the thing that Santorini does in terms of theme that's a little bit fun is like, it's like loosely Greek myth, right? So each of the special powers are tied to a Greek mythology character, and I do think it does use that in some fun ways.
Yep.
But I don't disagree with you about Tash-Kalar.
I was hoping that people could come to know me as the one recommending Tash-Kalar, and Neelan is the one recommending Baby's first Santorini. So that is what divides us. No, Tash-Kalar is a great one to look into if this sounds interesting at all. It's weird. It's different. It is definitely still an abstract strategy game. You may offend the purists, the GIFs and the Yinches and the people who like all those weird four-letter 4-letter game series? GIPF?
5. Yeah, it's called a GIF series.
Oh, but they're 5? There's 5 letters in GIPF?
Oh, there isn't. There's 5 in Tamsk, and there's 5 in Devon.
There's a famous series of modern abstract strategy games that all use a weird naming convention, and I keep meaning to play some of the famous ones because they look cool. But I think the abstract strategy purists may be turned off by some of the asymmetry that you've got in Tash-Kalar and the swinginess, but I do think it's one that could change some minds, so you should check it out. That is Tash-Kalar, Tash, Kalar, Kalar. I just want to say it because how else will you find it? Not by spelling it out. I don't know. Tash-Kalar, Arena of Legends.
I think a tough type of game to get to a crowd who doesn't like this type of game are social deduction / hidden trader games. If you're not a fan, they can often generate a lot of anxiety because you might be the traitor, you might be the spy, you might be the one bad guy amongst the good guys, and then what are you going to do? You know, it's a stressful situation. A game that has just come out and available at our former sponsor, Target, is Snakes, spelled the way you think it'd be spelled, but add 2 S's at the end. This is a game by Phil Walker Harding, he of Sushi Go fame and Barren Park. The way that Snakes gets around the issue that is found in a lot of hidden trader games is it mixes in a little bit of trivia in there. So the way it works is there is going to be a number of people at the table who are going to be the snakes, the bad guys, and then the rest are going to be the humans / mongoose. I'm not going to get into why humans are playing with mongoose, but those are the 2 teams. And before you is going to be a trivia question that you're likely not going to know the answer to. Sort of like in the Wits and Wager style where, you know, these are sort of like weird, obscure trivia question that no one is likely to know the answer to, although that has not always been the case in my experience. And then everybody's going to close their eyes. The bad guys, the snakes, will open their eyes. They'll know the other snakes at the table, and they will get to know what the actual answer is. So they'll know that of either domestic cat, elephant, or squirrel, they'll know that the elephant is the only one of those animals that is faster than Usain Bolt. Now, that is a question in the game, but fear not for those who are averse to spoilers, because I do not know if that's actually the answer. I'm taking a guess. But for example, all the bad guys would know in that case the answer was B, elephant. And then the card is flipped over, and then everybody has 2 minutes to discuss what they think the answer is. And what the snakes are trying to do is to get people to guess the wrong answers. And what the humans are trying to do is try to guess the right answers. And the scoring goes from there. I won't get into how the scoring works, but that's basically the gist of the game. If you're a bad guy, you're trying to get people to guess the wrong answer. But the questions are so obscure that trying to steer them away from the answer that is the correct one often takes no effort at all, because somebody will say, oh, I think I've heard of that, and then we'll just naturally steer the answer to one of the incorrect questions. Or there's going to be no situation really where the answer is obvious. So you trying to steer people away from the answer isn't going to look suspicious in most cases. In addition, I have played this game with people who were hesitant to play it because they didn't like hidden trader games. And so far, all of them have really, really enjoyed themselves. I think it's, again, a great way to introduce hidden trader games, not only to those who don't generally like them, but to people who are not familiar with the genre, just because it really lessens the stress and the pressure on the quote-unquote traders.
This sounds like a game that would be really, really mean to play with like gullible people. Because you might be like, no, yeah, like, you know, remember, Mark, we were talking about this, you know, last year, and like you just like can't know if, you know what I mean? Have you ever done that with your friend where you're just like at the store and you're like, hey, did you know? And then you just tell them something completely ridiculous, you know, like the owner of Costco, you know, owns, you know, and then like you just like convince them that it's true.
Well, first of all, there goes our potential sponsorship with Costco. Nice, Callan.
Sorry.
But no, yes, it's like, wait, why would you think an elephant would beat Usain Bolt?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you're kidding, right? Yeah.
I feel like Christina would hate this.
Well, if you're not Christina, and you're not maybe the person who owns Costco, I would suggest Snakes for those looking for hidden trader games.
One of the games I wanted to talk about was something that actually was kind of relevant for myself, because one of the things that I used to do a lot when I was in high school and college was play collectible card game, especially the dueling style of card games like Magic the Gathering, for example. And I sort of fell out of favor of wanting to collect those card games. And I'm sure that this is a problem that a lot of people have. Either they have no interest in engaging in that sort of hobby where they're going to be forced to spend a lot of money over the long term, or they just don't know how to break into that genre of game. And one of the ways that I have satisfied that urge so much, and even if you have some sort of vague familiarity with the genre, but you feel like it's not for you, I think one of the good low barrier ways to play in the card dueling game genre is with something like Eternal Chronicles of the Throne. So this isn't strictly a collectible card game, but it comes 90% of the way to capturing everything I like about the genre, but without the financial damage that genre tends to inflict on people that get really, really deep into it. Because the appealing thing about Eternal Chronicles of the Throne is that it's a box. They have changed the card collection aspect to a core box deck building game. What that means versus a deck construction game like Magic the Gathering is you're not pre-building these decks ahead of time, you're building your deck as the game progresses. So you start with a basic starter deck and you're acquiring decks over the course of the game, and then every time you play it, it just resets and you start your deck from scratch. But it still has all the dynamics that I love about Magic the Gathering. You're playing creatures out, you're blocking creatures, you're choosing whether to use those creatures to block because you want to protect yourself from damage or to preserve them in order to attack back on the following turn. You're getting artifacts with cool effects and spells, and it's got all of the things I love about the genre, but it doesn't have any of the downsides that I just typically have associated with it. This is a game that I have actually used in this way with multiple people that I've said to, like, hey, do you want to try Magic the Gathering with me? And they were like, no, I don't want to have to learn a complicated rule system if I know I'm never going to go down this road. And then now in recent years, I don't even have to do that anymore. I just play Eternal with that person. As long as they're willing to learn a deck builder, which, does not have a huge rule set in the grand scheme of things, then they'll be able to pick this up and be playing it and having a good time with it in the space of one game without feeling they have to invest into a system. I think Eternal Chronicles of the Throne is such a great fit for people that want to engage with this sort of system without going whole hog into it.
I mean, this speaks to me as a person who didn't ever really play Magic, but through board gaming and through, the natural sort of like osmosis, I think, of like being into games that include cards and stuff, and hearing a lot of people who've played Magic talk about it. I do have that temptation to play it again, but then I realize, how much you're going to have to pay to play and, how cutthroat that scene can be. And I've heard you talk about Eternal a number of times, and every time you do, I really get the itch to play it. So this is, speaking directly to me.
Yeah, it's also just like in that sort of class of simple deck builders that, plays really, really well at two players, like packs up cleanly and doesn't have that much sort of cruft thrown into it. It's fairly pure in what it's doing and does that one thing really, really well.
So that is going to do it for our episode. I would encourage everyone listening, if you've got an idea for a game that sort of fits into this mold, a game that might work for someone who doesn't generally like a mechanism, go to our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and go into our podcast channel and make a suggestion. Or if there is a mechanism that you don't like that you wish you would like, maybe go into there and say, hey, I'm not a big fan of auction games. Does anyone know like an auction game that might work for someone who's otherwise averse to them? And I am really confident that someone in there will give you an option or two. Our Discord comes through again and again and again with great suggestions, an incredibly knowledgeable group of folks who really know their stuff and are super, super welcoming. I dare say it's one of the most welcoming, most knowledgeable places on the internet for board gaming. So yeah, go to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and join the fun there. For a more old school discussion, you can go to our forums at boardgamebarrage.com/guild and post on our forums there. You can send us an email at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com or
Twitter, BRD Game Barrage. We don't have as many followers as we have listeners, so it's insane. Why aren't you following us there? What's the deal, man? Yeah. We put Nealon in charge, and look where we've gotten in 3 years.
We've gotten nowhere fast. Nealon is great for coming up with words that you're thinking of, but in terms of managing a Twitter account, garbaggio is what I would say. Email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. Check out our wiki at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki. Follow us on Twitter, for goodness sake, at BRD Game Barrage, or find us on all other forms of social media. Just search for us and we will be there. Thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? And until next week, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Economic genre. So typically when I think about economic games, these tend...
Economic.
or economic, depending on what country you're from, Kellen.
In the wits and wager style, where these are sort of like weird, what's the word I'm looking for? Weird, not commonly known trivia questions, and there'll be 3 answers, and then everybody's going to close it.
Was the word you were looking for?
What's the word I'm looking for?
Esoteric.
Yeah, that could work.
That was the exact word you were looking for. Don't lie.
I don't think so.
It's not good to lie on
Obscure.
the podcast.
What's that? Obscure. That's the word.
Thank you.
Neelan,
You're welcome, Mark.
Neelan says it once again. Yes, thank you, Neelan, for figuring out the exact word I was looking for.